Ukraine looks to inject new momentum into stalled peace efforts and secure continued military support. Zelensky says Russia is losing the initiative on the battlefield, even as Moscow intensifies its attacks on Ukrainian cities. Meanwhile, Europe is weighing a bigger role in any future negotiations as U.S.-led diplomacy struggles to gain traction. So is the balance beginning to shift here? Anne Applebaum is a staff writer at The Atlantic, and she joins me now from Warsaw, Poland. Anne, always great to have you on the program. You also agree with President Zelensky's viewpoint here and his assessment that Russia is losing the initiative and it can't win. And so it's interesting then to hear Vladimir Putin dismissing Zelensky's ceasefire letter. He called it rude, saying he sees no point in a meeting right now. And here's what he said when he was speaking at the St. Petersburg Forum last week.
I don't see any reason for a meeting. The Ukrainian side's only objective is to halt the advance of our armed forces. That's it.
So if the battlefield logic is now against him, why is he only hardening?
One has to assume that part of the explanation is that he's misinformed. The way the battlefield now looks is pretty dramatic. The Ukrainian front line is now a 20-mile wide zone. In that zone, everything is entirely transparent. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones and other drones can see everything. That means that any Russian soldier or tank or vehicle that goes into the zone is immediately struck. And this is why the Russians are unable to move forward. And of course, it's also why the Ukrainians have achieved so much confidence in recent months. And it's why so many Russians are dying, because when they do move, when they continually are ordered on the offensive, they're killed. The Ukrainians are saying they're killing sometimes as many as 1,000 people, or wounding and killing as many as 1,000 people a day, and that's 30,000 people a month. And their goal is to kill or eliminate from the battlefield more people than the Russians are able to recruit. And in the face of that, Putin has only very bad options. One of them is to continue trying to hit Ukrainian cities. Another might be to expand the battlefield in some other way, but another would be logically to have some kind of ceasefire. And the Ukrainians are betting that he might be persuaded to have a ceasefire sometime in the next few months. And I'll just add one other thing. At that same St. Petersburg conference where he made those comments you just played, the Ukrainians that morning, the morning of the opening of the conference, hit a refinery in St. Petersburg. So as the conference was meeting, there was black smoke billowing over the city from a Ukrainian drone strike, which doesn't seem to show great Russian progress.
No, we're showing a video of that black smoke billowing right now, and to see it in St. Petersburg, I mean, we've been reporting more on these assassinations, the drone attacks, not only just on the border in Russian territory with Ukraine, but most recently in large cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow itself. I want to go back to that 20-mile deep kill zone that you have described for us, and you sketch a future where this could actually become a Korea-style DMZ de facto border. If this becomes a frozen war, does that not just benefit Vladimir Putin, that as long as he's in power, he will have time to regroup, rearm, and at his choosing, restart a war?
So as I wrote it recently in The Atlantic, I described exactly this, that the border becomes the front line. You know, as the front line gets wider, and it is beginning to get wider as the drones become more powerful, it will become as uncrossable as a mountain range. I mean, it will be a DMZ, like exactly as you say, like the one between North and South Korea. But that is not a victory for Putin. I mean, you're right that it freezes the war rather than ending it. It doesn't bring justice to Ukraine. It doesn't return the territory of Ukraine that was illegally occupied. But it is very much not what Putin said the war would be. He described to Russians and has told them over and over again, including in recent days, that the point of the war is to destroy Ukraine as a country, to eliminate it from the map, to change its government, to make it into a kind of Russian satrapy or a Russian province. And none of that will have been achieved. A halt to the war, I think the Ukrainians believe would be good for them. They would like respite. They would like some sense of peace and calm. Ukrainians have suffered a lot over the last 4 years, and I think they're betting that in the long term it would work in their favor. They are the more dynamic society. They have the more innovative defense industry. They would be able to really build their links with Europe. There are already European companies that are investing in Ukrainian companies. There's Ukrainian production happening in some European countries. It would give them the basis to really protect themselves and move forward. I mean, the key, of course, is, as you hint in your question, is what happens in the long term. Are there security guarantees? I think the Ukrainians still have some hopes of involving the United States in that process, maybe forlorn hopes. There is some discussion of Europeans sending troops to Ukraine or having some role in monitoring the situation in Ukraine. I think they would need some feeling, some sense that the war wasn't about to begin again in order to rebuild their country and rebuild their society and bring people home. But even just as a start, I think they've decided that a ceasefire would be good for them.
Yeah, and to go back to what you just touched on, bring people home, I mean, a battlefield scenario that is finally working in Ukraine's favor and that potentially could lead even to a frozen conflict would give the economy a chance to revive and continue to revive, but also for the millions of Ukrainians who fled as the war began over 4 years ago, an opportunity to return home, because this is a key concern for Ukrainian officials as well, that the longer these refugees are living outside the country, the lower the chances continue to be for them to actually return if they've already started to reestablish their lives in other countries. It's interesting in your piece, you spoke with a woman who says she's given up on ever living in a normal country again. She said, quote, "That beautiful life will never return." So how do you, as a journalist and someone who's been covering this for so long and speaking with Ukrainians, how do you reconcile the strategic optimism on the battlefield with just this overall human exhaustion from Ukrainians?
It's funny, she said that to me not as an illustration of exhaustion, but as an illustration of how much she and her friends had readjusted. They just rethought their lives. The things they'd planned to do weren't the things they wound up doing, and everything was going to be different from what it was. I think returning some optimism to Ukraine will be difficult, but that's not quite the same thing as saying everybody's exhausted and can't function anymore. It's more that they're living a new and different life.
I just go back, if we go back to February 24th of 2022, you think about the life that Ukrainians were leading then, and people, as Russian troops were starting to roll in, the initial bombs were starting to fall, and people were sitting in restaurants having a normal life, at dinner, going to theater. It still was something that no one could fully grasp was happening in 2022 of so many, years later. This war is continuing. You also talk about the deficits here and some of the real needs that Ukraine, and specifically on the battlefield, needs right now militarily, more patriots specifically, and we have burned through the United States, so many in this war in Iran. Is the United States pullback of providing weapons that, as President Trump negotiated, would then be sold to Europeans and then delivered to Ukrainians, is that on pause now, or is there a sense that that may never resume at the rate that it was happening?
So my understanding is that it is happening to some degree. There are some things that are still being delivered. And I should say the most important thing for Ukrainians, the one thing the United States has that nobody else has, is exactly, as you say, these missile defense weapons, just to defend Ukrainian civilians. I mean, on the battlefield, their drone and other technologies are better suited now to fighting than anything the United States gave them at the beginning of the war. Europeans have funded the war. The economy is functioning and so on. It's just this one particular technology that Americans have that others don't. And it's a technology about protecting cities. It's not even about the front line. There is some, and my understanding is there is some are being delivered, but not in the numbers that are necessary. And look, I mean, the United States made a choice when the president decided to use those weapons in the war in the Gulf. Then when he decided to attack Iran, that was a choice not to use those same weapons elsewhere.